No fooding, mom collapsed, came the sudden message from my daughter Lily. I divorced a year ago, and my 7-year-old Lily was taken by my ex-wife Susan. I received a call from Lily saying that Susan had gotten terribly thin and was hospitalized. Lily, what's going on? I sent $2,000 every month. Why? Daddy, please help Mom. Hearing my daughter's heartbreaking cry, I left work early to rush to the hospital where Susan was admitted. Praying for their safety, I jumped into a taxi. When I arrived at the hospital, my crying daughter and my mother-in-law were there. Susan was lying in bed with her eyes closed as if she was asleep. How is Susan, mother-in-law? It's a mess. Hospitalized for malnutrition. Pills are piling up. Malnutrition? She said she was on a diet and hardly ate. I told her many times to eat more. I couldn't believe that she hadn't been eating properly until it came to this. Daddy, will Mom be okay? Yeah, she'll be fine. She'll rest in the hospital and we'll be back to normal soon, really. I gently held my daughter, who clung to me, shedding quiet tears. A faint smile appeared on her face, perhaps comforted by my presence. Has Lily slimmed down too? I felt something was off when I held my daughter. That's what kids are like in their growth spurts, my mother-in-law said. Is that so? I deeply regretted how ignorant I neglected my responsibilities towards the well-being of Susan and my daughter. I was the cause of our divorce. Back then, I was a salesman in a major corporation, so busy I could hardly come home, leaving everything about the house and our daughter to Susan. I neglected my responsibilities as a husband and a father, which made Susan deeply upset that she asked for a divorce. My ex-wife and my daughter then moved back to her parents' home, where her father and stepmother lived. They got married late in life, saying it's fearsome and lonely to be alone in old age. Susan said she was worried about being a burden by returning with her child, but to my relief, her parents welcomed her warmly. Being too focused on work, out of my own will, I sent them $2,000 every month, hoping they live a comfortable life. Being too focused on work, I was the reason for our divorce. So, I decided to do everything I can for the two of them. Our relationship after the divorce was not bad at all. At first, we often contacted each other. Barn and I listened a lot about my daughter, who just started grade school. However, for the past 6 months, I've been so busy that I couldn't contact my ex-wife. I wonder what happened to Susan during this period. I was deep in thought as I looked at Susan, who was lying on the bed, looking emaciated. Isn't this a bit too much for a diet? I wonder why she wanted to lose weight so much. Well, who knows, maybe she found someone she likes. She's still young after all. James, you can go home. I'll take care of Susan. I understand. I'll head home for today, mother-in-law. It must be hard staying with her. How about you, Lily? Come to my place. I want to go. Really? I want to go? As my daughter happily squeezed my hand, my mother-in-law immediately responded, I'll take care of Lily here. You're busy with work, James, and Lily needs to go to school. But Lily says she wants to go. I can drop her off and pick her up from school. You're busy with work, and it's difficult for you to take care of her. Plus, you don't even have custody over her. Her reasoning made me at a loss for words. I see. In that case, when she wakes up, could you ask Susan if she'll let me take care of Lily while she's hospitalized? Regardless of what you say, she's still my daughter. Saying I'm sorry to my disappointed-looking daughter, I bowed to my mother-in-law and left the room. Looking back, I regretted not insisting on taking her home right then. Several days had passed since Susan was hospitalized. One day after work, I returned home to find an unexpected sight. My daughter was there. Lily, did you come here all by yourself? Daddy. Looking up at me anxiously, Lily was wearing the same clothes as when I saw her at the hospital, a worn-out t-shirt, dirty shoes, and her hair seemingly tied by herself had grown out in a mess. This was it, the sense of discomfort I felt when we met in the hospital room. At the time, I was too consumed with Susan's collapse to notice, but realizing it now made me feel like a failure of a father. I invited my daughter into the house and offered her a cup of hot milk. Doesn't your mom buy you new clothes or shoes? Has it not been enough? No, it's not like that, Dad. She shook her head, appearing to struggle as she looked down. "I've been working hard, sending money so you and Mom could live comfortably. Has it not been enough, Dad?" "That's not it." As Lily looked on the brink of tears, I gently stroked her back, waiting for her to gather her words. After a while, it seemed she had finally regained some composure. "Grandma does mean things to me and Mom. She barely lets us eat. No way is that really true about Grandma." "It's true. I'm okay because I get lunch at school, but Mom's always hungry. That's why she collapsed. And you know, Grandma goes out every night, and when she comes back in the morning, she always badmouths me and Mom. Since living with Grandma, Mom has been treated like a servant every day." Lily's words, shouted with her eyes full of tears, hit me like a punch in the gut. Could my mother-in-law be the cause of Susan's malnutrition? What on earth, if I had kept in contact, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Biting my lip in frustration and helplessness, I felt a small warm hand gently touch mine. "Dad, don't cry." My heart tightened as Lily smiled at me bravely, holding back her own tears. With that, I decided to help my ex-wife and daughter. About a week later, I was contacted by the hospital of Susan's scheduled discharge. Normally, the in-laws would have been the first to get contacted, but I had already arranged with the hospital to prevent that. I had grown suspicious towards my mother-in-law since she would always prevent me from seeing Susan and barely let me talk to her on my daily visitations. Moreover, she would constantly call me, even when I had informed that Lily was staying with me. And hearing Lily's stories made me convinced that something was off with my mother-in-law. So, I decided to take Susan directly to my house on the day of her discharge without letting my mother-in-law know. When Lily and Eve frustration poured out on Susan and Lily when she was out of money, she was out of money. My father-in-law is a quiet man who couldn't stand up to my mother-in-law, so he turned a blind eye to it. He didn't offer any help, and Susan just had to endure it. But I let Lily suffer. I'm a terrible mother, aren't I? That's not true. The one at fault is entirely my mother-in-law, I said. I see, thank you. With that, tears quietly ran down her cheeks. A few days later, I waited for the day my mother-in-law was out and headed to my in-laws' house. When I arrived at their place, my father-in-law, Apollo, energetically bowed his head deeply to me. "I'm truly sorry. I've done an awful thing to Susan and Lily." "Sir, I've heard about what my mother-in-law has been doing to Susan and Lily. I came here to help them." Upon hearing my blunt declaration, my father-in-law gradually started speaking. "I noticed what she's been up to, but I turned a blind eye. I became unable to speak because I grew scared seeing her change day by day. But I can't stand seeing my daughter and granddaughter get hurt anymore." From his gradually trembling voice, my father-in-law's regret was palpable. He wished for the same thing as I did, to protect both of them. "Sir, could you lend me a hand?" I asked him to keep an eye on my mother-in-law's behavior, where my mother-in-law heads out to, what she's doing, how my $2,000 transfer was spent, and how Susan's credit card was used. Subsequently, I also began to investigate my mother-in-law. On a later day, the hospital bills were expensive. God, you really are one hell of a burden. On a later day, I visited my in-laws' house with my ex-wife. As soon as Susan went in, I could hear a loud voice berating her. I quickly followed and entered my in-laws' house. "Pardon my intrusion, James." Ignoring my surprise, his mother-in-law turned to my ex-wife and asked, "Are you all right?" Susan trembled in fear from being berated. Rubbing her back, I turned my gaze towards my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law froze for a moment, then hastily said, "Oh, welcome. What brings you here so unexpectedly?" "I just dropped off little Lily at school. Thought I could come over to discuss some matters regarding Susan and Lily without having Lily present. Hope I'm not intruding." A discussion about what, I wonder? As you can see, we're getting along quite nicely. Saying that, my mother-in-law tapped on Susan's shoulder to wish. Susan clearly showed her discomfort. Already seated on the living room sofa was my father-in-law. I pulled Susan close, sitting down nearby. "I've been transferring money to Susan's account to help out, even a little bit after our divorce. Is it true you are using up all the money?" "What money? I know nothing about it. Susan's probably trying to cover up her frivolous spending by blaming me. I wonder where the $2,000 every month is going. What a terrible daughter." As expected, my mother-in-law pretended not to know, even trying to shift the blame onto my ex-wife. She probably thought she could brush it off. But I exchanged a glance with my father-in-law, who quietly nodded. And from here, the reprisal begins. That's odd. You said that $2,000 every month. I bet you told Susan that I stopped sending out money and had abandoned her and our daughter, right? My mother-in-law started trembling as I spoke those words. That's what I heard from Susan. I didn't have control of my bank books or cards. You took them all. I couldn't possibly know about it. Besides, you've been using my credit card too, haven't you? I've received the receipts. What exactly have you been using Susan's credit card and the $2,000 you receive every month for? To our question, my mother-in-law shook her head, insisting she didn't know. Of course, we expected her to play dumb. In the midst of this, my father-in-law brings something out from the back of the room. Stop lying anymore. What do you mean? Do you suspect me as well? To my enraged mother-in-law, my father-in-law pulled out a few photos. So that's where you've been going every night. You seem to have a favorite haunt at the nightclub. It appears you've been having a grand time using James's money and Susan's credit card. How did you... My father-in-law and I looked into everything. Although we only had to follow you around since you were so careless, we figured out everything without much deep investigation. What's wrong with using my daughter's money? I should be allowed that much. Furthermore, it seems that wasn't enough money for you. You've been tricking money out of widowed men like my father, almost akin to marriage fraud, haven't you? Shut up. It's the victim's fault for being fooled. As we presented the evidence, my mother-in-law brazenly shrugged it off. I thought this man had money when I married him, but it turns out he didn't have much. Luckily, my daughter Susan has been a great contributor. Men at the local senior centers are so easy. All it takes is a soft voice to have them smitten. Now, hearing this, my father-in-law's jaw dropped to the ground. Susan and I were at a loss for words. We're calling the police. No, anything but that. At the mention of the police, my mother-in-law turned pale, but I went ahead and called them. Why would you call the police? This isn't looking good for me. So, you're aware that what you've done is wrong? Just don't call the cops. I apologize for everything. Forgive me. Judging from her attitude, it seemed like she'd done this before. Don't worry. We'll have the police conduct a thorough investigation. My mother-in-law gave me a gentle smile. Pale-faced and shaking, she was taken away by the police officers who arrived shortly after. When it was all over, it felt like a weight had been lifted off our shoulders, and yet, I gave Susan a warm smile. Then, with tears in her eyes, she gave me a gentle smile in return. Apparently, my mother-in-law was arrested on charges of marriage fraud, and it seems like several people are demanding her to repay their money. Naturally, my father-in-law divorced my mother-in-law. Furthermore, he sued her for the emotional distress inflicted on her family from her harassment. Susan also claimed $50,000 in damages for the misuse of her credit card. Of course, I'm also demanding her to return all the money I transferred. My mother-in-law, who is now behind bars, doesn't seem to have an easy life waiting for her. As for me, afterwards, Susan, please marry me again.